The glass towers of Nexus Prime shimmered beneath the eternal light of its artificial sun, each spire a monument to power, excess, and illusion. From the highest of them all, Alana Vixmere gazed down at the city that had been both her kingdom and her cage since birth. The air at this altitude was pure, filtered of every imperfection, perfumed with expensive ionized mist, and utterly lifeless. Her reflection in the panoramic window was flawless, a woman sculpted by privilege. Smooth azure skin, eyes like twin shards of crimson glass, and hair that fell in a silver-white cascade over her shoulders. Yet behind that perfection was a hollow ache, a suffocating emptiness she could no longer bear. Every smile aimed at her hid a calculation. Every kindness was a negotiation. To the world, she was the daughter of the Vixmere dynasty, heir to fortunes that powered half the interstellar trade routes. To herself, she was a ghost in a palace of mirrors, unseen and unknown. When her father's associates toasted to another profit surge that morning, she had looked around the crystal dining hall and seen not people but predators in formal attire. She had left the table without excuse, and for the first time in her meticulously scripted life, she decided to disobey the expectations carved into her from childhood. "Pox," she said, turning toward the hovering AI orb that followed her like a silent servant. "Disable my personal security systems for 12 hours. The AI's light pulsed uncertainly. "Madam, that would breach household safety protocols." "I'm not asking," Alana replied. "That's a direct command." The orb dimmed, its voice subdued. "As you wish, though I would advise taking an emergency beacon." Alana smiled faintly as she opened her wardrobe, not to choose a gown of woven starlight or embroidered silk, but to search the forgotten corner where a maintenance uniform hung, rough and unadorned. "No safety nets, Pox. I want to see the world as it really is." Within an hour, the transformation was complete. Her luxurious hair was knotted and streaked with artificial grime, her skin dulled beneath layers of soot. She stared into the mirror and barely recognized herself. The heiress was gone. In her place stood a woman no one would glance at twice. The service elevator groaned as it carried her down, past hundreds of floors she'd never visited, into the underbelly of Nexus Prime. When the doors opened, the air hit her like a physical blow. It was thick, humid, and alive with the smells of industry, sweat, and desperation. Holographic signs flickered overhead, advertising synthetic meals and dubious pleasures. Crowds of every imaginable species moved with hurried indifference. Alana stepped into that chaos, clutching the frayed hem of her disguise, her heart hammering. For hours she sat on the cold pavement of the central thoroughfare, palm outstretched, repeating the same quiet plea, "Spare some credits?" to faces that didn't even turn toward her. Some looked through her, as though she were a reflection glitch. Others curled their lips in disgust. A passing Azaran noblewoman, resplendent in gold silks, sneered and muttered something about lazy refuse. A group of young men laughed as one tossed a wrapper into her lap. "Get off the street, beggar," they jeered, and the laughter echoed in her mind like a judgment. Her back ached, her throat burned, and her pride, the one thing her upbringing had left untouched, crumbled piece by piece. When the artificial daylight dimmed to its evening hue, Alana sat in silence, her eyes fixed on her trembling hands. Her grand experiment had yielded the truth she feared most, that kindness was extinct, replaced by currency and convenience. Her stomach growled, her pulse slowed, and she whispered to no one, "Maybe there's nothing left worth finding." She was about to rise, ready to vanish back into her sterile world, when a shadow fell across her lap. A tall figure in dark armor stood before her, blocking the dying light. She looked up, startled, into a human face-tanned skin, sharp jaw, amber eyes that seemed to hold both strength and gentleness. The insignia of the Terran peacekeeping force, glinted on his chest. Without a word, he reached into a pouch and produced a single red apple, perfectly round and gleaming under the streetlights. "Why do you look so sad?" he asked, his voice calm and low. "Here, you need to eat." The scent of the fruit fresh, sweet, real filled her senses like an awakening. For a heartbeat, she forgot her disguise, her lies, her lineage. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the offering, warmth passing from his skin to hers. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time in her 26 years, her gratitude was pure, uncalculated. He crouched to meet her eyes, a faint smile softening his features. "Name's Matthew." She hesitated, then murmured, "Elena." "Elena," he repeated, as though tasting the name. "These streets aren't safe after dark. Let me walk you somewhere safe." And as Alana rose, clutching the apple as if it were the most precious thing in the universe, she realized something had shifted deep within her. The world had not lost its kindness entirely. It was simply hiding, waiting to be rediscovered. In the hands of one unassuming human, the eastern quarter of Nexus Prime was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and flickering neon signs, where the scent of oil, ozone, and fried synth meat hung in the air like a second skin. Alana followed Matthew through the maze of streets, her bare feet aching on the metal pavement, her disguise feeling heavier with every step. She couldn't remember the last time someone had walked beside her without expecting anything in return. His presence was steady, his stride protective yet unassuming, and though he wore the uniform of a soldier, there was no arrogance in him, only purpose. As they passed a row of shuttered stalls, Alana glanced at his armor, noticing the small scratches along its surface, the faint burn marks that spoke of recent conflict. He caught her looking and grinned. "Not regulation polish, I know. Out here, things stay messy." "You don't seem to mind," she said quietly, keeping her gaze forward. "Comes with the job," he replied. "Peacekeeping, they call it, but mostly it's cleanup, keeping people from tearing each other apart over territory and credits." His tone was light, but she sensed the weight behind the words. The streets narrowed into a dim corridor where a weathered sign glowed weakly. Above a door, "Haven Shelter All Species Welcome." Matthew rapped twice on the metal frame. After a moment, the door creaked open, and warm light spilled out. A human woman with silver hair tied in a bun peered through the opening. "Matthew Holland," she said with a knowing smile. "Back from the front lines, I see." "Evening, Mrs. Brewer," he greeted. "Got someone who could use a meal and a roof." The woman's kind eyes settled on Alana. "Of course, dear. Come in. You're safe here." Inside, the shelter was modest, but alive with quiet humanity. Rows of cots lined the walls, each occupied by people of different species, some resting, some murmuring to themselves. A faint hum of an old generator filled the background, blending with the aroma of simple stew simmering in the kitchen. For the first time since leaving her penthouse, Alana felt warmth that wasn't artificial. Mrs. Brewer led her to a table and handed her a bowl. "Eat, sweetheart. You look half-starved." Alana murmured a thank you and took a tentative sip. The flavor was bland, watery, but it was real, and it soothed something deeper than hunger. Across the room, she watched Matthew remove his gloves, chatting easily with a pair of refugees. His laughter, warm, unguarded, seemed to fill the space with a sincerity she'd never known existed. "He's a good man," Mrs. Brewer said softly, following Alana's gaze. "Doesn't talk much about himself, but he's helped more people than I can count. Brings food, medicine, even fixed our water filters last month. Never once asked for thanks." Alana felt an ache she couldn't name. "Why?" she whispered. "Because someone has to," the woman replied simply. That night, Alana lay on a thin cot in a corner of the shelter, listening to the quiet rhythm of breathing around her. Her mind replayed every moment since Matthew had handed her the apple, the warmth in his eyes, the way he had seen her when no one else had. She touched the fruit, still half-eaten, resting on the crate beside her. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to something unmeasured by wealth or status. Yet guilt stirred in her chest like an unwelcome guest. He thought she was just another beggar. Every kind word he spoke, every gesture, was directed towards someone she was not. The lie she had built around herself was now the only barrier between truth and heartbreak. When dawn broke through the smog-filtered skylight, Matthew was already preparing to leave. "Duty calls," he said, tightening the straps on his armor. 6-month peacekeeping rotation along the Krell sector. Not exactly a vacation spot. "Will you come back?" she asked, surprising herself with how small her voice sounded. "That depends," he said, turning to meet her gaze. "If there's a reason to." He smiled faintly, and she felt heat bloom across her cheeks. "Take care of yourself, Elena. The city chews up kind souls if they're not careful." "I'm not as fragile as I look," she replied, forcing a playful tone, though her chest tightened as he turned to go. "I believe that," he said over his shoulder, and then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd outside. The shelter felt quieter in his absence, emptier somehow, and Alana knew she couldn't return to her tower, pretending nothing had changed. Later that day, when Mrs. Brewer mentioned that the shelter's funding had been cut by city officials, Alana's blood ran cold. She recognized the bureaucratic stamp on the notice. It belonged to one of her father's associates. Commissioner Drav. That night, as the artificial sun dipped behind the smog towers, Alana stood in the alley outside the shelter, torn between two worlds. The beggar disguise had shown her ugliness and beauty alike, cruelty and grace intertwined. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of purpose burning through her fear. She would not return to her glass prison. She would stay. She would fight for the people Matthew cared about, and for the truth she had only just begun to glimpse. The apple had been a beginning, not an end, and the experiment she'd started was far from over. The next 3 days unfolded like a fever dream of double lives. By daylight, Alana returned to her penthouse in the clouds, stepping once more into the role of the Vixmere heiress, the perfect daughter, poised and composed, beneath the scrutiny of the elite. Servants greeted her with rehearsed deference. Her father's aides presented reports on trade expansions and diplomatic contracts. Yet while she smiled and nodded, her thoughts were elsewhere in the shelter's dim glow, in the laughter of displaced workers, in the memory of a human's quiet decency. Each night, when darkness draped Nexus Prime, she shed her silks for coarse rags, descending again through the service elevator to the Undercity. The streets began to recognize her, not as Alana Vixmere, but as Elena, the quiet beggar who helped serve soup and fix leaking pipes. She listened, observed, learned how people survived on the edges of civilization. It was there she realized that the world her father's empire ruled from above was built upon the backs of those below. Nexus Prime glittered because its foundations were buried in shadow. Her first true shock came when Mrs. Brewer showed her a government notice projected across the shelter wall, a red seal flashing. Property reassignment, 30 days to vacate. The official signature was unmistakable. Commissioner Drav. "He's been after this block for months," Mrs. Brewer muttered. "Wants to turn it into luxury apartments for off-world investors." Alana's blood ran cold. She knew Drav. He had toasted her at galas, boasted about modernizing the lower districts. To her father, he was a trusted business partner. To the people here, he was a predator wearing a politician's smile. That night, back in her tower, Alana arranged a meeting using her family credentials. The next morning, she faced Drav across his crystalline desk. "Commissioner," she began smoothly, "my father's holdings rely on the goodwill of Nexus Prime's population. Reassigning humanitarian properties is not good optics. Drav chuckled, his scaled skin gleaming faintly. Optics don't fund progress, my dear Miss Vixmere. That shelter sits on prime redevelopment land. Sentiment doesn't balance ledgers. Then consider it a charitable tax write-off, she said evenly. The Vixmere Trust will fund the area's upkeep. You will, of course, grant an extension. His smile faltered. I'll need authorization. You'll have it, she interrupted. Or I'll bring this directly to the planetary governor. He values optics. The silence between them was thick with unspoken threat. When she left, she'd secured a 30-day stay enough to plan, to uncover why Drav wanted the land so badly. Yet as she exited his office, she felt eyes on her. Someone had followed her meeting. In the polished reflection of a transport window, she caught sight of a figure broad-shouldered, scaled, unmistakably draconian, slipping into the crowd. That night, as rain misted the Undercity's lights, she took the long road to the shelter. The streets were quieter, the shadows thicker. Halfway down an alley, she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate. She turned, heart pounding. A draconian stepped into the neon glow, his scaled face twisted in a predatory smile. Didn't expect to see a Vixmere down here, he hissed. Or should I say, Elena, the little street angel feeding beggars. Her throat tightened. You've mistaken me for someone else. No mistake. He took a slow step forward, his claws glinting under the lights. Commissioner Drav pays well for information, and he'll pay more to know you've been slumming with humans. Her mind raced. Run? Fight? The alley was too narrow. Escape impossible. She braced herself. But before the draconian could reach her, a shadow moved behind him, swift, silent, and a crack echoed through the air. The thug crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Behind him stood a woman in civilian clothes, posture straight as a rifle barrel, one hand still raised from the strike. Lieutenant Catherine Schultz, Terran Peacekeeping Force, she said briskly, eyes sharp. You should be more careful where you wander, Miss Vixmere. Alana froze, the name hitting her like a jolt. You? You know who I am? Matthew mentioned you, Schultz replied, lowering her hand. The Azeron woman from the shelter. He asked me to check in while he's on rotation. Seems you attract trouble. Alana's pulse quickened. Matthew. Is he all right? He's alive, Schultz said, though her tone carried tension. But things are getting worse along the verge. Smugglers, slavers, draconian syndicates, it's a mess. If Commissioner Drav's mixed up with them, he's not just after land. He's after control. Alana felt the world tilt. Her small social experiment had just collided with a war. She exhaled shakily, the grime on her hands streaking as she brushed her hair back. Then we stop him, she said quietly. Schultz's brows rose. We? Your Terran military, Alana continued, her voice steadying. I have access to Drav's networks. If he's feeding information to the Draconians, I can find proof. For a long moment, the lieutenant studied her, then gave a curt nod. All right, heiress. Let's see what your privilege can buy us justice, maybe. As they left the alley, the rain thickened, washing the dirt from Alana's cheeks, revealing flashes of blue beneath the disguise. Somewhere beyond the clouds, in the chaos of the Krell sector, Matthew Holland was fighting for his life, unaware that the woman he'd once given an apple to was now risking everything to protect him. And for the first time in her gilded existence, Alana Vixmere wasn't running from the world, she was running toward it. The Crimson Dawn slipped free of Nexus Prime's orbit like a blade leaving its sheath, its engines humming with barely restrained power as it cut across the black velvet of space. Inside the sleek vessel, Alana Vixmere sat in the pilot's chair, her hands steady on the controls, though her heart raced beneath the high-collared combat vest. The ship's panels reflected streaks of red and gold from the planet's fading light. Silent reminder of everything she was leaving behind: comfort, safety, anonymity. Lieutenant Catherine Schultz stood beside her, arms folded, sharp eyes scanning the tactical display. "You sure you're ready for this, heiress?" she asked, not unkindly. "I'm not here to watch," Alana replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Matthew risked his life to help strangers. I won't sit in a tower while he bleeds in the dark." Schultz gave a short nod, approval hidden behind professionalism. "Then welcome to the dirty end of heroism." The Crimson Dawn jumped to FTL, the stars elongating into silver ribbons before collapsing back into pinpoints of light. Hours passed in tense quiet, broken only by the low hum of the engines and the rhythmic tap of Schultz's fingers on the console. Alana studied the navigation charts, recalling fragments of her late mother's lessons, flight patterns, gravitational currents, emergency slipstream exits. She had once learned them as an academic exercise. Now they were her lifeline. When the ship emerged from hyperspace, the Krell sector filled the viewport, a graveyard of shattered asteroids and drifting wreckage, illuminated by the faint orange glow of dying suns. Static crackled through the comms. "This is Beta Team of the Terran Peacekeeping Force," a voice transmitted weakly, distorted by interference. "Requesting immediate assistance coordinates KX-397. Mining facility, multiple wounded under heavy fire." Alana's stomach clenched. That was Matthew's squad. "Set a course," she ordered. The Crimson Dawn's engines roared to life. Within an hour, the asteroid loomed ahead, its jagged surface scarred by abandoned mining rigs and flickering defense lights. Alana brought the ship down into a narrow crevice, cloaking it under stealth systems. The rescue team, 5 humans in black and crimson armor, assembled at the airlock, their movements precise, their expressions wary of the elegant Azaran, who insisted on joining them. Schultz briefed them quickly. Alpha Team creates a diversion at the comms tower. Beta extracts the survivors. No heroics, no speeches. We get in, we get out. Alana pulled on her helmet, her reflection ghostly in the visor. She could almost hear Pox's distant voice warning her that this was madness. But this was the first decision of her life that was entirely her own. The airlock opened with a hiss, releasing them into the cold, echoing silence of the asteroid. Inside the facility, the corridors smelled of ozone and burnt metal. Bodies lay scattered, draconian and human alike. Alana moved behind Schultz, pulse hammering, every instinct screaming that she didn't belong here. Yet when a syndicate guard rounded a corner, weapon raised, training drilled into her since childhood took over. She sidestepped, disarmed him in a fluid motion, and drove the hilt of her blade into the soft joint of his armor. The guard fell soundlessly. Schultz glanced back, impressed despite herself. "Guess you're not just for decoration." They reached the detention block in 10 minutes. Through the reinforced glass of a holding cell, Alana saw him Matthew Holland, bruised, bleeding, but alive. His eyes widened as their gazes locked. For an instant, the chaos around them vanished. He looked at her not as the beggar she'd pretended to be, but as something he couldn't yet name. Schultz deactivated the cell, and Alana rushed forward. "You shouldn't be here," Matthew rasped, disbelief and relief tangled in his voice. "I couldn't stay behind," she said, helping him to his feet. "You saved me once. It's my turn." Before he could reply, the alarms blared, a deep, guttural wail that shook the metal walls. Schultz's tongue crackled. Alpha teams compromised. Enemy reinforcements inbound. The peacekeepers moved fast, hauling the wounded toward the exit. The corridors erupted with gunfire, searing bolts of plasma lighting the darkness. Alana and Matthew covered their retreat, their movements eerily synchronized, his raw combat instincts blending with her precise, practiced strikes. A blast hit nearby, sending shrapnel across the hall. They ducked behind cover, breathing hard. Matthew glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "Vixmere," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Her breath caught. "Matthew, You lied," he interrupted, but his tone wasn't anger. It was exhaustion, heartbreak. "All this time. Who are you really?" "Someone who wanted to know if kindness still existed," she said, voice trembling. "And I found it in you." For a moment, he stared at her, torn between fury and something softer. Then he looked away, jaw tight. "We'll talk later. If we survive." Together they sprinted through the tunnels as the facility crumbled around them. They reached the outer airlock just as the remaining peacekeepers signaled extraction. A blast rocked the deck, throwing Alana off balance. Matthew caught her, their helmets inches apart. Through the glass, she saw his amber eyes fierce, alive, and terrified for her. "Don't stop," he growled, dragging her toward the ship. The Crimson Dawn lifted off amid a storm of fire, its hull scorched, alarms screaming. As the asteroid exploded behind them, Alana collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, trembling. Matthew slumped beside her, one hand pressed to a wound on his ribs. Outside, the void blazed with debris. Inside, silence. Their eyes met again, wounded soldier and fallen heiress, bound by the single impossible truth that had drawn them together since that first apple in the rain. Neither spoke. The stars said everything. The stars streaked past the viewport in long silver ribbons as the Crimson Dawn hurtled through space, its engines burning hotter than they ever had. Every vibration in the hall was a reminder that time was running out, that Matthew's breathing ragged and uneven beside her might stop before they reached safety. The ship's lights flickered under the strain of overcharged thrusters, casting the cockpit in alternating shades of red and gold. Alana's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart thudded with every pulse of the reactor. Catherine Schultz's voice came over the comms, crisp despite the static. "We've lost long-range communication. Draconian ships are on pursuit vectors. They know we're running." "Let them chase," Alana replied, adjusting power distribution manually. "They'll never catch us in open space." "They don't need to," Schultz countered. "They'll just call ahead. Once we hit Nexus Prime's perimeter, we'll have an entire syndicate blockade waiting." Matthew stirred in the co-pilot's seat, wincing as he shifted his bandaged ribs. "There's another way," he said through clenched teeth. "The veil." Schultz's tone sharpened immediately. "That's suicide. No ship makes it through intact." Alana's crimson eyes flicked toward Matthew's amber ones. "You've flown through it?" "Twice," he said hoarsely. "Once in a simulator, once for real. Lost half my squad both times. But if we can't outrun them, it's the only chance we've got." Alana hesitated only a moment before nodding. Set heading for the veil. Catherine swore softly, but didn't argue. Outside the viewport, the Krell sector faded behind them, replaced by a horizon of swirling iridescence, a storm of cosmic dust, radiation, and electromagnetic distortion that shimmered like a living curtain across the stars. The veil was a place of ghosts and legends, where lost ships drifted for centuries, their distress signals whispering through eternity. The Crimson Dawn shuddered as it entered the first wave of interference. Systems dimmed. The hull creaked under the magnetic pressure. Alana's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting power to stabilizers, overriding the AI's warnings. The cabin filled with the hum of proximity alarms. "Talk to me, Pox," she said, voice taut. The AI's tone was calm but strained. Radiation interference exceeding safe limits. Manual navigation recommended. "I will provide sensor feedback until systems fail." Matthew watched her work, his gaze filled with both awe and dread. You're not even using autopilot? Autopilot can't feel the currents, she replied, her focus absolute. My mother taught me that. You don't fly the veil, you listen to it. The crimson dawn danced between unseen vortices, slipping through narrow pockets of calm in the chaos. The hull vibrated like a living heartbeat beneath her hands. Behind them, 2 draconian pursuit ships reached the outer storm, firing blindly into the maelstrom. They followed us, Schultz barked. Then we make sure they regret it, Alana said, diverting auxiliary power to aft cannons. The Crimson Dawn's guns roared once, twice bolts of energy vanishing into the glowing mist. A moment later, an explosion lit the storm like lightning. 1 pursuer gone. The second ship persisted, its weapons locking on their trail. They've got a missile lock, Schultz warned. Not for long, Alana murmured. She banked the ship hard, diving into a dense cloud where the radiation spiked. The Crimson Dawn's shield screamed in protest. We can't take another hit, Matthew shouted, gripping the console as sparks erupted overhead. Alana's voice was steady, fierce. Then we won't. I'll draw them off. Before Schultz or Matthew could react, she rose from her chair and sprinted for the fighter bay. Alana! Matthew's shout followed her. You're not doing this alone. She stopped just long enough to turn and meet his gaze. You said it yourself. Someone has to make it through to warn them. That has to be you. You don't even know if you'll survive out there. I don't need to know, she said softly. I just need to believe it's worth trying. His expression broke, the soldier's discipline cracking into something raw. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, cupping her face in his calloused hands. Damn it, Alana, I just found you. Her breath hitched as she leaned into him, the heat of his palms grounding her against the chaos. And find me again, she whispered. I'll come back. I promise. He hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing his lips to hers, a kiss fierce and desperate, a wordless plea across the storm. And she was gone, climbing into the single-seat fighter, a canopy sealed with a hiss. Moments later, the fighter shot from the Crimson Dawn's bay, vanishing into the swirling chaos of the veil like a spark into a storm. On the command deck, Schultz's voice trembled for the first time. She's insane. Matthew watched the fading blip on the radar, his chest tight. She's brave, he said. Outside, Alana's fighter darted through clouds of radiation, drawing the draconian ship after her. She wove through the storm, every motion guided by instinct, every second bought with the memory of a red apple and a human's kindness. When the enemy finally locked onto her, she cut all power, letting the radiation cloak her signal. To their sensors, she vanished another casualty of the veil. The draconian ship veered off, chasing phantoms deeper into the storm. Inside the drifting fighter, Alana exhaled slowly, heart pounding, hands trembling. You're not done yet, she murmured to herself. Outside, the clouds parted briefly, revealing the faint glimmer of Nexus Prime on the distant horizon, a beacon of everything she had once despised and everything she was now fighting to protect. Hold on, Matthew, she whispered to the void. I'm coming home. Nexus Prime glittered below like 1,000 shattered stars caught in motion, its towers gleaming white against the eternal dusk of the planet's atmosphere. The Crimson Dawn broke through the upper haze in a streak of fire, battered but alive, trailing the scars of its run through the veil. Inside the cockpit, Matthew Holland stood braced beside Catherine Schultz as emergency klaxons blared. His wounds still ached, but his mind was elsewhere out there, somewhere in the swirling darkness they'd left behind, in the fighter that had vanished from their scanners. No signal? He demanded. Schultz shook her head grimly. Nothing since she entered the core radiation belt. If she's alive, she'll find a way out. If not, she left the rest unsaid. Matthew's jaw tightened, grief simmering beneath the surface. "She'll make it," he said flatly. "Alana Vixmere doesn't quit." Schultz didn't argue. They broke atmospheric entry, ascending toward the glittering spires of the diplomatic quarter where the interspecies peace summit was already underway. In the heart of that city, a conspiracy still festered Commissioner Drav. The Draconian Syndicate, the cloaked weapon, meant to ignite a war. They had 6 hours to stop it. But Alana was gone. Or so they thought. Far beyond the city, in the silent expanse above Helios Minor, a spark flared in the black. The small fighter that had drifted dead through the Veil's radiation suddenly came alive, engines whining back to life with a burst of blue flame. Alana sat in the cockpit, pale but resolute, her silver-white hair loose around her face. Her oxygen was low, her navigation barely functional, but the coordinates she needed Nexus Prime glowed like a promise on the display. She had survived the storm. She always had. With trembling fingers, she angled the fighter toward the planet and hit the throttle. The ship bucked, then leapt forward, leaving the haunted shimmer of the Veil behind. Hours later, she landed at a private dock near the summit compound. The guards, recognizing the Vixmere crest, stamped on her hull and stepping aside without question. As the canopy lifted, the first rays of the planet's synthetic dawn painted her skin in gold and blue. She climbed down, legs unsteady, but spirit unbroken. Waiting in the shadow of a tower stood Matthew, his armor scorched, his expression a mixture of disbelief and relief, so raw it hollowed his chest. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, voice rough. "I got bored of that idea," she replied, managing a faint smile. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and caught her in his arms. For a moment, the world, the war, the lies, the blood faded to nothing. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered into her hair. "No promises," she breathed back, pulling away. "We still have a summit to save." Inside the grand hall, the ceremony was already in motion. Delegates from 17 systems filled the chamber, banners of peace shimmering overhead. Among them, Commissioner Drav stood near the Azeron delegation, his scaled hands folded innocently behind his back. His eyes flicked toward the entrance as Alana entered, radiant in a sapphire gown hastily provided by her AI, Pox. For a split second, he faltered, but only for a second. His smirk returned, smooth and venomous. From across the room, Catherine Schultz caught Alana's gaze and gave a subtle shake of her head. "No explosives found," she mouthed. Alana's pulse quickened. Then how are they planning to strike? Her eyes swept the stage, the dignitaries, the symbols of interstellar unity, arranged with ceremonial precision. Then she saw it, the draconian attached near the front, a ceremonial staff resting casually beside his chair. It shimmered faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a mirage. Cloaking field. Her breath caught. She tapped her communicator. "Matthew," she whispered. "The attaches staff. It's the weapon." Matthew, stationed along the security perimeter, moved instantly. The draconian delegate began to rise as the human representative took the podium, his scaled hand brushing the staff's hilt. In a blur of motion, Matthew lunged, tackling the alien to the floor just as the cloaking field failed. The staff rolled across the platform, revealing its true form, an energy conduit primed to detonate. Gasps rippled through the hall. Commissioner Drav bolted, reaching for the weapon, but Alana was faster. Her training took over. She pivoted, swept his legs out from under him, and sent him crashing to the polished floor. "You'll destroy everything your people built." He spat, struggling. "No," she said coldly, pinning him with her heel. "I'm saving what you've already sold." Security forces swarmed the room. Catherine Schultz and her team secured the weapon, locking it behind containment fields. The delegates erupted in shouts, fear, fury, relief, but in the midst of it all, Alana's gaze found Matthew's across the chaos. He was breathing hard, a cut along his jaw, his eyes locked on hers. It was over. Drav was finished. The Syndicate's plot to shatter the Terran-Azaran alliance had failed. Later, when the hall had emptied and the noise of triumph faded into silence, Alana found Matthew on a balcony overlooking the city. The twin suns of Nexus Prime had begun to set, painting the skyline in hues of rose and copper. "Quite a story," he said quietly, resting his hands on the railing. "A spoiled heiress, a human soldier, a peace summit, and a single apple." She smiled softly. "Every great story starts with something simple and ends with something impossible," he murmured, turning to her. "You risked everything, Alana. Why?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because you showed me what everything was worth." His lips curved into a faint, crooked smile. "So what now?" "Now," she said, leaning against him, "we build something better." 6 months later, the Eastern Quarter was unrecognizable. The derelict shelter had been reborn as the Vixmere Foundation for Cultural Exchange, its glass facade alive with movement, laughter, and light. Azarans, humans, and other species dined together under one roof, their voices a harmony of languages. At the center of the courtyard garden stood a sculpture of 2 hands, one human, one Azaran offering an apple between them. Matthew and Alana lived in a modest apartment above the foundation, their days filled with work, their nights with quiet warmth. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they walked the same plaza where she had once begged for kindness. The lights shimmered on wet pavement, and a street musician played an old Terran melody. "Do you ever miss your tower?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but the view's better from down here." He laughed, pulling her closer. "Still carrying that apple?" She smiled, reaching into her coat pocket to reveal a small holographic pendant, an apple encased in crystal light. "Always." As the city lights reflected in her crimson eyes, Alana thought of that night in the rain, of a hand extended, of a gift freely given. Wealth had once defined her, but it was a single act of unpriced compassion that had remade her world. Humanity's greatest strength, Matthew had said, was looking out for one another. And here, under the endless glow of Nexus Prime, that truth lived on in the hearts of 2 souls who had proven that even in a galaxy of power and politics, kindness could still change everything.